Hi, welcome to my TED Talk. I'm Tara Whitney, and I will be exploring the question, how do assistant dogs impact the people using them, and is there potential for them to be replaced by robots? When talking about assistant dogs, I am referring to all the types of dogs that help people live their lives to the fullest, increasing independence and allowing for them to contribute to society. These dogs include service, therapy, emotional support, guide, and hearing dogs, just to name a few. So here I have a picture of a few of the types of assistant dogs, just to kind of see like a visual demonstration of them. So how did I get here? When we were brainstorming senior topics, I immediately knew I wanted to do something with animals. I've always had a deep love for animals, as you can see from this picture of me petting a horse before I could even walk. And then the picture on the right, in the red shirt, is my cousin Jeremy, who has autism. And I've always kind of just been passionate about disability awareness growing up around him, and just seeing like how important it is to have like resources for people with disabilities. And so doing assistant dogs, I was kind of able to like combine these two things. When I began to look into assistant dogs, I found a lot of ways they were able to help communities, help society. For instance, helping individuals feel safe to leave their houses and contribute meaningfully to society. However, there was a lack of research showing just how much they can truly help society, and there was barriers preventing them from being used to their full potential. Because so many barriers existed, I decided to look into potential solutions as well. To start with, one of the main problems is how assistant dogs are viewed in society today. While service dogs are mainly accepted, other types like emotional support dogs are highly controversial because they don't help with the physical stuff, they help with the emotional stuff, which is harder to classify. And then oftentimes people will also just say their dog is an emotional support dog so they can take them with their places, which also makes it harder for emotional support dogs. So here you can see some of the controversies where most people agree to support with service dogs, and then less people agree with the emotional support dogs or therapy dogs. And then here again you can see some of that difference where almost over half the people believe in the survey believe that service dogs should be allowed in airplanes, schools, and classrooms, and then less than half believe that emotional support or therapy dogs should be allowed in any of the 3 locations. Similarly, another barrier is called invisible disabilities. The idea that things like blindness, and struggles with mobility are easier to classify than things that are considered invisible disabilities like diabetes or seizures, which aren't as obvious to people who don't know them. But allowing these people to have their assistance dog could potentially save their lives, and because the public doesn't have the knowledge around this, they often are likely to interfere. Furthermore, people in the public often don't know that there is such a wide variety of assistant dogs that help with a wide variety of issues. Or they don't have the knowledge to know what the different types of assistant dogs do. So here I have a table that just shows 3 of the main types: service dogs, therapy dogs, and emotional support dogs. So you can see the primary function of emotional support dogs is to provide emotional support through companionship. Therapy dogs, our purpose is to provide emotional support and comfort to many people, while service dogs are specifically trained to assist just one person. And then on the left-hand side, you can see some of the other things like where the assistant dogs are allowed to go.
Point it at the computer.
The second main issue that occurs is the lack of research in this field. That is to say, most of the research that we currently have is very specific to only one part of the field. And while it might not seem like a big deal, there's often a lack of quantitative and statistical data. Most of the research is based on statistics of people that are like very biased in this field as well, such as assistant dog owners or therapists. A quote from David Gray says, quote, "Most of the current evidence is based on qualitative studies investigating a single aspect of the relationship between an owner and an assistant dog, and it's often underpowered or subject to bias," end quote. Which again just illustrates how the research here is often biased and might not be 100% accurate. The third barrier that causes issues is from the unclear laws and legislation regarding assistant dogs. While some countries have very clear laws and legislation, others do not. For instance, quote, Looking beyond the European border, there are other countries that have already implemented laws addressing the definition and function of assisted dogs, such as Australia. Having a closer look at the Australian system can provide further beneficial insights into potential frameworks, approaches, and caveats that must be recognized. In Australia, the law surrounding the use of assistant dogs is clear, at least in principle. So in Australia, they have very obvious rules where like the public can see where assistant dogs are allowed very clearly, and they have a lot of guidelines on like what qualifies people for assistant dogs, and it's very obvious. But in other places, they don't have these clear guidelines, and it's also difficult because this can cause difficulties not just for assistant dog owners, but also like businesses and the public at large. Because while service dogs are typically allowed in various locations, therapy dogs and emotional support dogs are limited. But this lack of like clear guidelines makes it hard for people to realize like where their assistant dog might be able to go, and it kind of like puts the responsibility on the individuals that own the assistant dog or like businesses to have to like figure out. And because of this lack of clear wording, people traveling or just trying to live their daily lives might also face difficulties, such as being prohibited from bringing their assistant dog with them, or not being recognized as having an assistant dog, which often comes from the idea that like some countries recognize emotional support dogs or like emotional disorders for service dogs, but others don't. And so like it could be like in Colorado, someone could have a service dog, but then like even just going over to Kansas, someone could not be recognized for having a service dog because things vary so much. Because so many of these barriers exist, a number of solutions have been proposed. The first one is looking at a robot called Ellie that a group at Hello Robot Inc. proposed. So on the left here, you can see the robot and how it's built and set up, and just all the working parts of it. And then on the right, you can see one of the robot completing one of its tasks. So the way the robot works is basically the owner or user gives a verbal command, and then in order to do this, basically for the manipulation command, so person must say arm, so like robot arm, tug it, or take it, or robot arm, bring it here, or robot arm, drop it. Or they could say Ellie, drop it. And then for the administration commands, they must say admin, so it could be like Ellie, admin, quiet, or robot admin, on or off. And then while the owner is doing that, they must also signify where they want to go. So they use a green laser pointer to illustrate the item that the robot must manipulate. And so, for instance, this towel tied around a door, they would use a green laser pointer to illustrate it, and then the robot would go up right next to the door, and then the user must again illustrate where they want to go. And so here I have just an example of successfully giving a verbal command, where the user would say something like robot arm give, the robot would say I heard robot arm give, and they would say is this what you said, and then the user could confirm, and then the robot would be able to do it so that there's a little bit of room so that they can like cancel it if needed. And so the robot completed a set of tests, and while they all have an 80% or higher success rate, there was a few failures that the robot had, including in the Check It Down trial, you can see some of the errors, including, quote, the first failure case, trial 6, the failure was the same as in trial 5 of tugging. Since the gripper was not able to close completely around the towel due to the mobile base being too close to the door's surface, in trial 7, the robot successfully grasped the towel and was able to turn the door handle, but not enough to open it. And along with that, the robot also has had difficulties with being too close to the drawer, going to the side instead of the front of the drawer, and unfortunately the robot currently can only open doors and drawers that have 25N, which is this rating that basically just means they're like less securely shut. So it could open something that's more like tightly shut. So based on this, the robot still has a lot of room to improve, and would most likely need to have a lot of improvements before it could really help, because if it was to help someone in the house that can't do these things, there's not really room for errors because the person can't like do things on their own. Along with this, studies have been done looking into the emotional side of robots as well, seeing if they can help emotionally. And a study here, you can see that AAT is animal-assisted therapy, and AIBO is a type of robot dog. And you can see the control group, there was no improvement in loneliness in an elderly nursing home. But then if you look at the robot dog and the real dog, you can see both had improvements in their loneliness for the residents, and the improvements were right about the same. There was no difference between the two. However, it is really important because the robot dog will most likely not help in all circumstances, and would more so help in like a circumstance where like someone's allergic to dogs or like can't have access to an emotional support dog. But on the opposite side, quote, in a study comparing a living dog and ABO, children 7 to 15 years of age were more interactive with the living dog and described higher levels of physical essences, mental states, sociability, and moral standing to the living dog. So that kind of goes to show that like children might not benefit as much from a robot dog, but maybe someone like in an older care facility could, or someone that like can't have access to a real dog. So this could be kind of more of like a backup option to assistant dogs in a way. Another solution that might be obvious is doing a little bit more research in the field. There's a lot of areas that have yet to be explored, and gathering more quantitative or statistical data would be helpful. This would mean looking into how assistant dogs help both help and hurt society, and then once they do that research and scientific experiments, they could educate the public on this. And then in order to do this, there is most likely going to need to be funding from the government or some or other organization, like is the case with most research. But doing this research, they would be able to really educate the public on the use of assistant dogs and how helpful they could be. And as I previously mentioned, assistant dog owners struggle due to the lack of clear wording in laws and legislation, as well as like the variability at different places. So another solution could be changing the current language to be more clear and consistent nationally or even globally. That way, it's clear to the public and clear to everyone where assistant dogs can go and like what the rules are about them. This would mean governments having updated rules and laws that are national and don't vary in different places. So like I mentioned, like in America, it would be like the ADA, like following ADA guidelines to make sure they're updated, and then like it wouldn't be where like in one place, like in Texas, there's one law, and then like you go just like to Colorado and there's like an entirely different law. And so it would just be consistent even like across countries or maybe even like nationally, so that it's not so hard on like the individuals. Unfortunately, assistant dogs aren't where they should be. There are barriers that are preventing them from being used to their full potential, even though they are improving people's lives or potentially saving them. According to David Grice, quote, 20% of visually impaired adults never leave their home without human assistance. But this human assistance isn't always possible, which is why we need assistant dogs. It's hard enough for people who are mobility impaired, blind, deaf, or otherwise impaired to try and navigate their lives. And assistant dogs are an amazing tool that we need to use to allow them to have their full, we need to allow for their full potential. Thank you.